At this graduation, we officially cut ties with our eldest daughter. That was how my father chose to begin my sister's big day, his voice steady into the microphone, carrying across the football field of Westbrook High as if he were announcing a scholarship winner instead of erasing me from his life. The June sun was warm against my shoulders, the metal folding chair beneath me slightly uneven on the grass, and for a second I honestly thought I had misheard him. Around us, families clutched bouquets of white roses and helium balloons shaped like gold numbers, cameras lifted, applause still echoing from the principal's last speech. My mother sat 2 seats away, her posture straight, her pearl necklace catching the light, not looking at me. My sister Olivia stood near the front row with the other honor graduates, her navy gown pressed perfectly, her cap pinned into glossy chestnut hair, frozen mid-smile as if someone had paused her. I didn't gasp. I didn't stand up. I adjusted the strap of my pale blue dress, crossed my ankles, and kept my face calm. Inside, though, something shifted, not shattered, not exploded, just shifted quietly into place like a puzzle piece I had been holding for years. 48 hours earlier, I had been in my small apartment across town wrapping Olivia's graduation gift in silver paper. A delicate gold necklace with a tiny compass charm, engraved with the words "Find your way, live." It had cost me nearly 2 weeks of careful budgeting from my marketing job, cutting back on takeout and skipping my usual Saturday coffee run. I'd imagined giving it to her after the ceremony, imagined Mom finally smiling at me without that faint strain around her eyes, imagined Dad clapping my shoulder and saying, "You've always been such a good sister, Evelyn." I should have known better. There had been signs. The week before, my assigned seat had mysteriously changed from the family section to a row near the aisle. My mother's texts had grown shorter, colder. "Be on time. Don't make a scene." When I'd asked what that meant, she responded with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. Still, I told myself I was being dramatic. I have a tendency to overthink. That's what they've always said about me. The sensitive one. The difficult one. The daughter who asked too many questions. Growing up, I was the straight A student who stayed up past midnight studying while Olivia danced through life with easy charm and a laugh that melted every adult in the room. I don't blame her. She never asked to be the favorite. But favoritism has a quiet gravity. It pulls everything toward it. Birthdays rearranged around her soccer tournaments. College savings redirected to better opportunities. My own acceptance letter to a state university met with polite nods, while her community college transfer became a full family celebration. I learned early how to clap for other people's milestones without expecting anyone to show up for mine. And yet, sitting there under the bright blue sky, hearing my father continue, "We cannot support the choices she has made," I realized this wasn't about one argument or one disagreement. It was about control. About image. About the version of me that never fit into their polished narrative of the Harper family. A few rows ahead, someone whispered. A woman turned slightly to glance at me, then quickly away. I felt the weight of 100 unspoken questions pressing against my back, but I kept my chin level. If they wanted a public performance, I would not give them tears. I would not give them raised voices. I simply reached into my handbag and wrapped my fingers around my phone, cool and steady in my palm, and for the first time that afternoon, I allowed myself a small, almost invisible smile. Because if they were certain they wanted to do this here, today, in front of everyone who believed they knew our family so well, then they were about to learn something too. I could feel the air change after my father finished speaking, as if the entire field had inhaled at once and forgotten how to exhale. The applause that followed was thin and confused, a few polite claps from relatives who did not know where to look. My mother leaned toward the microphone next, smoothing the front of her cream blazer, and spoke about family values, about sacrifice, about how proud they were of Olivia for embodying everything they believed in. She never said my name again. I watched the tassels on the graduate's cap sway in the breeze and remembered being 17, standing on this same field with my own diploma in my hand while my parents rushed away early because Olivia had a dance recital across town. They had. Promised they would watch the recording later. I do not think they ever did. It is strange what the mind chooses to replay in moments like this. Not the sharp arguments or the slammed doors, but the small dismissals. The way my mother once told a neighbor that I was going through a phase when I decided to major in communications instead of accounting. The way my father called me stubborn for questioning why the college fund I had been told about suddenly no longer existed. I had accepted their explanations at the time. Investments shifted. Priorities changed. Olivia needed more support. I had taken out loans quietly and worked part-time at a bookstore, convincing myself that independence was a virtue. Sitting there now, listening to them frame me as a disappointment, I understood that this narrative had been rehearsed long before today. A breeze lifted the edges of the graduation programs on our laps. My phone vibrated once in my hand. A text from my cousin Rachel read, "Are you okay?" I did not respond. Instead I opened my email, scrolling to a folder I had created months ago when a different kind of realization began to form. It started last winter when I ran into Mr. Henderson, my father's longtime accountant, at the grocery store. He had looked surprised to see me and even more surprised when I mentioned working overtime to pay down my student loans. He had said, almost casually, "I thought your parents covered that for you and Olivia both." The confusion in his eyes stayed with me. That night I searched through old documents I had saved in a box in my closet, scholarship letters, financial aid statements, emails from the university. Numbers did not match. Dates did not align. There were transfers from an education account I had never accessed. When I asked my mother about it, she told me I was imagining things and accused me of trying to ruin Olivia's final year. After that conversation, invitations to family dinners stopped. Group chats went silent. I was slowly edged out, not with confrontation but with absence. Now, as my father spoke about difficult decisions and protecting the family name, I realized this ceremony was the culmination of that slow erasure. Olivia's name was called over the loudspeaker. She walked across the stage, shoulders squared, smile fixed. I stood up with the rest of the crowd and clapped for her, because she is still my sister and because I refuse to let their behavior change who I am. When she returned to her seat, she did not look at me. I wondered if she knew how deep this went or if she had chosen not to ask. My father stepped away from the microphone and the band began to play a cheerful tune that did not match the tension coiled in my chest. I slipped the silver-wrapped necklace from my bag and held it for a moment, feeling the smooth paper under my fingers. Then I placed it back inside. Gifts are meant for celebrations, not performances. The principal resumed the program, speaking about bright futures and endless possibilities. I listened carefully, waiting for the right moment, because timing matters. Truth delivered too early is dismissed. Truth delivered too late loses its power. As the final group of graduates lined up and the crowd prepared to move toward the parking lot, I stood slowly, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and began walking toward the stage steps, my phone still in my hand, my heartbeat steady, not racing, just deliberate, like someone who has finally decided that silence is no longer a kindness but a liability. I moved through the folding chairs and across the trimmed grass without rushing, aware of the way conversations lowered as I passed. The band was still playing, a bright brassy melody that felt almost surreal against the weight of what had just happened. My father was shaking hands near the edge of the stage, accepting congratulations as if he had delivered an inspiring speech instead of a public rejection. My mother stood beside him, her smile precise, her fingers resting lightly on Olivia's arm like she was guarding a trophy. I stopped a few feet away and waited until my father noticed me. For a moment, something flickered across his face, annoyance or perhaps uncertainty. He leaned slightly toward me and said under his breath that this was not the time to cause trouble. I told him calmly that I agreed, that timing was important, which was exactly why I needed just 1 minute. Before he could respond, I stepped toward the side of the stage where the principal and a few faculty members were gathered. I introduced myself politely and asked if I could make a brief clarification since my name had just been mentioned publicly. The principal hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but there is a particular steadiness that comes when you know you are standing on truth. He handed me the microphone. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I simply said that since my parents had referenced family integrity, I believed transparency was important. I explained that several years ago an education fund had been established in both my sister's name and mine. I explained that I had recently discovered transfers from that account that did not align with tuition payments or scholarships as previously described. The field grew quiet in a different way now, not confused but attentive. I continued, stating that I had documentation from the university and correspondence from the bank indicating that the majority of the funds allocated for my education had been redirected without my knowledge. I mentioned that when I asked about it, I was told I was mistaken, that my memory was flawed. I paused there, letting that settle. Then I held up my phone and read, clearly and slowly, a dated email from my father to the accountant authorizing the reallocation of the remaining balance to a private investment account under my parents' names. There was no shouting from the crowd, no dramatic reaction, just a collective stillness that felt heavier than noise. My mother's composure faltered first. She took a step forward and said this was a misunderstanding, that financial decisions are complicated, that family matters should remain private. I nodded and said that I agreed family matters should remain private, which is why I had not spoken about this until I was publicly described as someone who did not deserve to be part of the family. I clarified that I had never objected to supporting my sister's education, but I did object to being portrayed as irresponsible when the truth was documented and dated. I saw Olivia's expression shift from pride to confusion, then to something else, something closer to realization. My father attempted to take the microphone back, but the principal gently intervened, suggesting that perhaps this was not the appropriate venue for further discussion. I handed the microphone over willingly. I had said what needed to be said. I did not ask for apologies. I did not demand explanations. I simply stepped down from the stage and walked toward the exit, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Behind me, I could hear raised voices beginning to overlap, no longer polished, no longer rehearsed. For the first time in years, the narrative was no longer one-sided, and I felt lighter, not triumphant, not vindictive, just clear, as if a window had finally been opened in a room that had been sealed for far too long. I did not look back as I reached my car, but I could feel the tremor spreading behind me, the way a polished surface begins to crack once pressure is applied in the right place. The parking lot was crowded with minivans and pickup trucks decorated with graduation balloons, engines starting, doors slamming, families laughing too loudly in an effort to return to something normal. I unlocked my car and sat behind the wheel without turning the engine on. My hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. They were steady. That surprised me more than anything. My phone began to vibrate almost immediately. First my mother. Then my father. Then a series of messages from relatives who had never once asked about my student loans or my missing tuition fund. I let them ring. Silence can be an answer. A few minutes later there was a knock on my passenger side window. Olivia stood there, still wearing her navy gown, the gold honor cord draped over her shoulders. Her mascara had smudged slightly beneath her eyes. I lowered the window halfway. She did not accuse me. She did not defend them. She simply asked, very quietly, if what I said was true. I told her yes. I told her I had documents. I told her I had asked questions long before today and had been told to stop making problems. She swallowed and looked back toward the field where our parents were still standing near the stage, surrounded now not by admirers but by tight circles of whispering adults. She said she had never seen the account statements. She said she had always believed the scholarship story. I nodded. I told her that believing what you are told is not a crime. I also told her that protecting a lie after you know it exists becomes a choice. She did not answer that. She removed her graduation cap and held it in both hands, staring down at the tassel as if it suddenly felt heavier. I handed her the silver-wrapped box from my purse. I told her it was meant for today regardless of everything else. She hesitated before taking it, then whispered thank you in a voice that sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I did not ask her to pick a side. I did not demand loyalty. I have learned that forced allegiance creates resentment, not clarity. She stepped back from the car and I rolled the window up slowly. As I finally turned the ignition, I caught a glimpse of my parents walking toward us. My father's jaw was set, his pace brisk, his expression no longer controlled. My mother's heels sank slightly into the grass as she hurried beside him, one hand gripping her purse tightly against her side. I pulled out of the parking space before they reached the curb. In the rearview mirror I saw them stop, standing side by side, watching the car disappear down the exit lane. The drive back to my apartment took 20 minutes, though it felt suspended outside of time. At a red light, I checked my phone. There were missed calls, voicemails, and a text from my father that read, "We need to discuss this immediately." Another from my mother said, "You have embarrassed us." I read those words twice. Embarrassed us. Not you have hurt us. Not we need to understand. Just embarrassed. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. When I reached my building, I climbed the stairs to my third-floor unit and stepped inside the quiet space that I have built for myself piece by piece. The small kitchen counter was lined with unopened mail. A framed photo of me and Olivia from years ago sat near the window. We were children then, missing front teeth, sunburned from a day at the lake, leaning into each other without calculation. I picked up the frame and studied it for a moment. Families do not fracture overnight. They erode. They chip away at truth until only the version that serves them remains. Today I had simply placed the missing pieces back on the table. Whether they chose to look at them was no longer my responsibility. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Mr. Henderson asking if everything was all right. I typed back one sentence. The truth is out. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like the difficult daughter or the inconvenient one. I felt aligned with something steady and unshakable inside me. And whatever conversation was coming next, it would not be on their terms anymore. That evening the silence in my apartment felt different from the silence at the graduation field. This one was chosen. Controlled. I changed out of my dress, folded it carefully, and hung it back in the closet as if the day had been ordinary. Then I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the small kitchen table by the window. The sun had started to dip behind the neighboring buildings, casting a warm orange glow across the countertop. My phone remained face down where I had left it. Eventually I turned it over. There were 3 new voicemails from my father. The first was measured, telling me we needed to fix what I had done. The second was sharper, accusing me of distorting facts. The third was quieter, almost strained, warning that public accusations could have consequences. I listened to each one only once. Then I deleted them. A few minutes later my mother sent a long message explaining that finances are complex, that sacrifices had to be made for the good of the family, that I was too young at the time to understand investment strategies. I read it slowly. There was not a single sentence that acknowledged the missing funds or the decision to move them without my knowledge. It was all about optics. All about reputation. I set the phone down again and opened my laptop instead. I logged into the shared cloud folder where I had stored the scanned statements, the email from my father authorizing the transfer, the timeline I had created outlining the dates and amounts. Seeing everything organized on the screen steadied me. Numbers do not argue. Dates do not change depending on mood. Truth does not require volume. My phone buzzed once more. This time it was Olivia. The message was simple. I opened the box. I am sorry I did not know. I stared at those words for a long moment. I typed back that she did not owe me an apology for something she had not chosen. After a pause she responded with a question. Did they really? Use your portion for the investment account? I told her yes. I attached a screenshot of the relevant email. There was no immediate reply. I imagined her sitting in her bedroom at our parents' house, the graduation gown folded on the chair, the necklace resting in her palm, her version of the family story shifting in real time. An hour later there was a knock on my apartment door. I did not expect visitors, but when I looked through the peephole I saw Mr. Henderson standing in the hallway, hat in hand. I opened the door and invited him inside. He declined to sit, remaining near the doorway as he spoke. He said he had received a call from my father demanding clarification about confidentiality. He said he had reviewed the documents and that what I presented was accurate. He also said that once financial decisions intersect with public accusations, especially when they involve designated education funds, there can be legal implications. His tone was not dramatic, just factual. He told me I had every right to request a formal accounting. When he left, I closed the door gently and leaned against it for a moment. The weight I felt was not fear. It was inevitability. Downstairs, I could hear a neighbor laughing, a television playing through thin walls, the ordinary rhythm of a building full of strangers living their separate lives. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a group message from extended family members asking what was going on. I did not respond. I did not need to defend myself in fragments. The facts were already in motion. I returned to the kitchen table, opened a blank document on my laptop, and began drafting a formal request for financial disclosure addressed to both of my parents. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard. For years I had been told I was overreacting, misremembering, exaggerating. Tonight I was none of those things. I was precise. And for the first time, I sensed that the panic unfolding on the other end of those unanswered calls was not about embarrassment. It was about exposure. The next morning I woke before my alarm, the room still dim with early light filtering through the blinds. For a few seconds I lay still, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint traffic outside on Maple Avenue. Then I remembered. The graduation. The microphone. The look on my father's face when the email was read aloud. I did not feel regret. I felt clarity. I sat up, reached for my phone, and saw a single new message from my mother sent at 2:30 in the morning. It read, "We can resolve this privately if you stop escalating the situation." The wording struck me immediately. Not "we can apologize." Not "we can correct this." Resolve. Stop escalating. As if facts were flames I had irresponsibly fanned. I set the phone down and moved through my usual routine with deliberate calm. Shower. Coffee. Oatmeal measured carefully into a bowl. Ordinary rituals matter when everything else feels unstable. At 8:15 my email notification chimed. It was from my father. Subject line, formal response. I opened it slowly. The message was longer than any he had sent me in years. He claimed the funds had been temporarily reallocated during a market downturn. He stated that the investment account in question had grown substantially and that the intention had always been to distribute assets fairly in the future. He emphasized that discussing internal family financial strategy publicly could damage business relationships and community standing. There it was again. Reputation. Community standing. Not once did he acknowledge that I had been told the education fund no longer existed. Not once did he address the email authorizing the transfer into a private account solely under his and my mother's names. I reread the message twice, then forwarded it to Mr. Henderson along with my drafted request for a complete accounting of the education fund from its inception to present. Within an hour he replied that he would begin compiling official statements. The word official felt heavy in a different way than panic. Official meant traceable. Official meant documented. Around midday my phone rang. It was Olivia. Her voice sounded different, stripped of the easy brightness she usually carried. She said she had confronted our parents that morning. She said our father insisted the money was always intended to benefit both of us and that I was misrepresenting timing. She said our mother cried and claimed the stress was ruining what should have been a joyful milestone. I listened without interrupting. When Olivia finished, I asked her one question. Did they show you the full account history? There was a pause on the line. No, she admitted. I told her that when documentation replaces storytelling, confusion tends to disappear. I could hear her breathing on the other end, uneven but steadying. She said she never wanted her graduation to become a battlefield. I told her I never wanted my integrity to become negotiable. Those two truths existed side by side. Neither canceled the other. Later that afternoon there was another email, this time from a local community board member who had attended the ceremony. The message was polite but direct, requesting clarification about the statements made publicly. Word travels quickly in small towns. I realized then that my parents were not just worried about family whispers. They were concerned about scrutiny beyond our living room. By early evening my father's tone shifted. A final message arrived suggesting that perhaps emotions had run high and that we should meet with legal counsel to ensure fairness moving forward. Fairness. It is interesting how language evolves when leverage changes hands. I stood by the window and watched the sun dip below the rooftops, painting the sky in soft streaks of pink and gold. My phone remained quiet for several minutes. Then a text from Olivia appeared. I believe you. It was only 2 words, but they carried more weight than all the speeches the day before. I closed my eyes briefly and let that settle. This was never about destroying anyone. It was about refusing to carry a story that was not mine. Downstairs, a car engine started, a dog barked, life continuing as it always does. Inside my apartment, the air felt steady. For years I had been told that questioning family decisions was disloyal. Today I understood that silence had been the greater betrayal, not of them, but of myself. And now that the questions were official, documented, and impossible to dismiss as imagination, the panic that once tried to silence me had shifted direction entirely. 3 days after the ceremony, the official account statements arrived in my inbox as secured PDF files with time stamps, transaction codes, and balances that told a story no speech could soften. I opened them at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee growing cold beside my laptop. Line by line, the numbers confirmed what I already knew. The education fund established in both my name and Olivia's had been steadily reduced over a period of 18 months, transferred in calculated increments into an investment portfolio listed solely under my parents' names. The dates aligned with my freshman year of college, the same months I had taken on extra shifts at the bookstore because I was told funds were tight. There was no market downturn emergency. There was no shared account benefiting us equally. There was intention. I forwarded the documents to Olivia first. Then I sent a formal response to my father, attaching the statements and requesting reimbursement of the principal amount plus accrued growth proportionate to the investment timeline. I kept the language measured, factual, impossible to dismiss as emotional exaggeration. Within an hour my phone rang. I answered this time. My father's voice was no longer authoritative. It was strained, edged with something that sounded unfamiliar on him, almost like caution. He said I was misinterpreting long-term planning. He said families operate on trust. I replied that trust requires disclosure. He grew quiet for several seconds. Then he asked what I wanted. It was the first direct question he had asked me in years that did not contain an accusation. I told him I wanted acknowledgement of the transfer, a written agreement outlining repayment, and a public clarification that I had not fabricated information at the ceremony. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. He said public clarification would draw more attention. I told him attention had already arrived. Silence followed again, heavier this time. Later that afternoon Olivia called. She had confronted them with the documents printed out on the dining room table. She said our mother cried again but this time did not deny the transfers. She said our father admitted reallocating the funds but insisted it was temporary and intended to grow the assets for future distribution. Olivia asked him why I had been told the account was empty. He did not answer directly. Instead he spoke about discipline and family hierarchy. When she repeated the question, he left the room. Hearing that, I did not feel satisfaction. I felt a strange calm. Patterns only hold power when everyone agrees to participate. Olivia told me she had never realized how much had been placed on me quietly over the years, how often I was labeled difficult whenever I questioned inconsistencies. She said she was starting to see the difference between protecting family and protecting image. That evening my mother sent a message requesting we meet at a neutral location. The phrasing was careful, almost diplomatic. I agreed to a meeting at a small conference room in Mr. Henderson's office the following morning. I chose that location deliberately. Neutral ground changes dynamics. The next day we sat across a polished oak table under bright overhead lights. My father's posture was rigid. My mother's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Mr. Henderson laid the printed statements on the table between us like quiet witnesses. There was no raised voice. No dramatic exchange. Just numbers and signatures. When asked directly whether the transfers had occurred without my knowledge, my father nodded once. It was a small motion, but it shifted the entire room. My mother looked down at the table. I did not gloat. I did not remind them of the microphone or the field or the public declaration. I simply said that acknowledgement is the first step toward repair. And for the first time since that day on the grass field, the panic that once tried to silence me was not aimed outward. It was turning inward, forced to confront itself under fluorescent light and documented proof. The acknowledgement in that conference room did not come with an apology. It came with a pause, a measured breath, and my father's quiet admission that the transfers had occurred without informing me. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, casting a pale glow over the polished oak table where the documents lay flat and undeniable. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and asked whether there was agreement to draft a repayment plan that reflected both the original principle and the proportional growth that would have accrued had the funds remained designated for their intended purpose. My father hesitated, calculating. My mother kept her gaze lowered, her fingers tracing the edge of her handbag as if searching for something solid to hold on to. Finally, my father nodded again. The second nod felt different from the first. The first was admission. The second was concession. Over the next hour, numbers were discussed with the same precision they had once been hidden behind. There would be a structured repayment schedule beginning within 30 days. There would be a written statement clarifying that my comments at the graduation were based on documented financial records. The word apology still hovered unspoken, but accountability had entered the room, and that was not insignificant. When the meeting ended, we stood slowly. My mother looked at me as if trying to recognize a version of her daughter she had not expected to encounter. Not rebellious. Not dramatic. Simply firm. Outside the office building, the late morning air carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass from a nearby lawn. My parents walked toward their car without another word. I watched them go, not with triumph, but with a kind of quiet detachment. Power had shifted, but it did not feel like a victory parade. It felt like equilibrium. Later that afternoon, the written clarification was sent to the same community board members who had inquired earlier. It stated that financial misunderstandings had occurred, that documentation supported my statements, and that the matter was being resolved privately. The language was careful, almost clinical, but it was public enough to counter the narrative that I had invented accusations out of spite. Within hours, the tone of messages from extended family changed. Where there had once been cautious distance, there were now brief notes expressing surprise, even admiration for my composure. I did not respond to most of them. This was not about collecting allies. It was about restoring truth. Olivia came by my apartment that evening without warning. She wore jeans and a loose sweater, her graduation glow replaced by something more thoughtful. She sat at my kitchen table where I had first reviewed the statements days earlier and told me she had spent the afternoon rereading old conversations in her mind. She admitted that she had noticed subtle differences in how I was treated over the years but had convinced herself that every family had its dynamics. She said she had never asked where my college tuition came from because she assumed our parents would not allow inequality between us. I told her that assumptions are comfortable until they are tested. She nodded slowly. We spoke for nearly 2 hours, not about money, but about memory. About birthdays. About college move-in days. About the time I had driven 4 hours to watch her perform in a winter recital while my own presentation went unattended. There was no resentment in my voice as I recounted those moments. Only clarity. Before she left, she placed her hand over mine and said she wanted a different kind of relationship moving forward, one built on direct conversation instead of inherited narratives. I told her that was entirely possible. That night, alone again in my apartment, I reflected on how quickly roles can reverse. Just days ago I had been publicly cast as the problem, the unstable daughter who threatened family unity. Now the documentation had reframed the story without shouting, without spectacle. It had required patience, precision, and the willingness to speak at the exact moment silence would have sealed the lie. I did not know what long-term reconciliation would look like, or whether my parents would ever move beyond damage control into genuine remorse. But I knew something else with certainty. Being disowned in front of a crowd had not diminished me. It had clarified me. And sometimes clarity is the most powerful exposure of all. 30 days passed with a steadiness that felt almost unfamiliar. The first repayment transfer appeared in my account on a quiet Tuesday morning, labeled clearly and without commentary. I stared at the notification for a long moment, not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Documentation had replaced denial. Structure had replaced vague promises about the future. It was not about the money alone. It was about acknowledgement made tangible. Over the following weeks, the rhythm of communication shifted. My father's emails were shorter, stripped of lecture. My mother's messages no longer framed my questions as attacks. There was distance, yes, but it was an honest distance, not the kind disguised as unity. Olivia visited often. Sometimes we spoke about ordinary things, her job applications, my upcoming project deadlines, the best place in town for iced coffee on a hot afternoon. Other times we revisited the past carefully, like archaeologists brushing dust from fragile artifacts. She admitted she had always felt subtle pressure to live up to an image carefully constructed around her. I admitted I had grown accustomed to being the counterexample. Neither of us had designed that dynamic, yet we had both lived inside it. One evening, nearly 2 months after the graduation, my parents invited us both to dinner. The house looked the same as it always had, white shutters freshly painted, the front lawn trimmed with precision. Inside, the dining room table was set with familiar plates and folded linen napkins. It would have been easy to pretend nothing significant had occurred. But there was a new quiet in the room, not tense, not brittle, simply aware. During the meal, my father cleared his throat and said he had underestimated the impact of his decisions. The words were not poetic. They were not elaborate. But they were direct. My mother added that fear of losing control had influenced choices she now recognized as unfair. I listened without interruption. When they finished, I told them I did not need perfection. I needed transparency. I explained that respect is not maintained through silence but through accountability. The conversation did not solve every unresolved memory. It did not erase years of imbalance. But it marked a boundary clearly drawn. After dinner, as we stood in the driveway under a soft amber porch light, my father said something that lingered long after I drove away. He said he had never expected to be corrected by his daughter in front of a crowd. I replied calmly that I had never expected to be dismissed by my parents in front of one. There was no hostility in the exchange. Just recognition. Driving back to my apartment, the streets felt ordinary again, stoplights cycling from red to green, storefronts closing for the night. I realized that what began as public rejection had become an unexpected recalibration. Being publicly severed from the family narrative forced me to define myself outside of it. The panic that followed my words at the ceremony was never truly about humiliation. It was about losing control over a version of events that no longer held under scrutiny. Now, months later, the story was simpler. Funds were being repaid. Statements were corrected. Conversations were less polished and more honest. I no longer carried the weight of defending myself in whispers. I had stood under open sky, microphone in hand, and spoken with evidence instead of emotion. That choice reshaped more than a bank account. It reshaped the balance of power. And in the quiet that followed, I understood something with certainty. Exposure does not destroy what is strong. It only unsettles what was built on concealment. The rest adjusts accordingly.